Now we're going to take a little look into the science of writing your resume, the science of reading, really, and how you can structure or write your resume to get the most impact. Because remember, we've only got a very short amount of time to make our point. But before we move into that, let's go ahead and do a real quick review. Remember that you're a teacher. Your job in creating this resume is to teach and instruct the hiring manager, the recruiter, whoever it is that is looking at your resume about what you're capable of. You're not going to tell any lies at all, ever, in your entire resume. You've only got a few seconds to make that impact. So now we know all this stuff. Are we ready to sit down and write? Not quite yet. And the reason is we want to know how people are actually going to be reading and going through our resume. This is a very important thing that we have to deal with here. And there is actually a lot of studies that break down how people behave when they sit down to read something. And if we can take that information and we can apply it to the document that we're going to create with this resume, then we can maximize the possibility of us, being able to get that interview, because the things that are on our resume actually end up getting read. Now, all of our resume, most of the time, is not going to get read. And it's sad but true. And I know you're going to spend all kinds of time, structuring this, but it's really not going to happen. So, we have to take and create or structure the resume so that the most important things, we try to make sure that at least those get read. Now, once it ends up, just before an interview is actually conducted, it's a very good possibility that, the resume does get read in its entirety, especially by HR staff. But at that point, you've already jumped through a whole bunch of hoops. The resume has, at least, and it's made it through the 10-second scan and the 30-second scan, and now, it's down to you actually getting an interview. But a lot of the resumes, most of them, get weeded out way before that because they weren't structured in the right way to make that impact when they only had that 10 seconds to do it. So let's take a look at reading as a science. Fixations, these little movements that your eyes go through, and you'll notice as you read the screen right now, as you read that bullet point, your eye doesn't really have a fluid motion. Okay, it skips around from point to point. That's how we read. So a fixation is a brief movement of the eye, and it jumps from one spot to the next. You might read 3 or 4 words per fixation. So every time your eye moves a little bit, you read some words and then you move again. What's that based on, the 3 or 4 words? It's based on how complicated the words are. If the words are very complicated, if the structure and the reading is difficult, then we might just read 1 word per fixation. So simple reading means we get to read more words per fixation. And each one of those fixations takes up about 1/4 of a second. So here's what we are faced with. We can structure our resume because of the averages that people are able to read. We can structure our resume to allow for more words to be read in the same amount of time, or we can make it where less words are read because it's difficult. Which one do we want to do? Well, of course, we want to get more words read. 200 to 1,000 words per minute is average, and that depends on that reading difficulty. If the words are complex, if the structure is difficult. So easier reading sentences will get more read, right, in the same amount of time. And remember, how long do you have when they do the 10-second scan? 10 seconds, right? 10 to 15 seconds. So, in that 10 seconds, they're going to read either 20 or 100 words. That's based on being able to read either 200 or 1,000 words per minute. Which would you rather them do? You want to give them as many words as possible, right? Well, if your resume is difficult to read, then you totally just limited yourself. You cut off the potential because you made it so complex that they could only digest 20 words in that 10 to 15 seconds. That's a bad idea, right? You want to give them 20 words or you want to give them 100 words. You can say 5 times as much if you structure things where it's easy for them to read. So you have to be able to take into account what it is that you want to say and relate it to them very, very quickly with the most impact. Let's talk about maximum impact. Short words equal more comprehension. Long words equal low comprehension. Except for the word comprehension, which obviously you know what that means. Right? Well, no, seriously, in your resume, shorter words are a lot easier for people to understand and actually, go down to a depth. So if you use shorter words, they're going to be able to read more. Like, for example, short words, that phrase right there, takes up less space than comprehension. So if I'm talking about those fixations jumping around, well, somebody could fixate on short and read words at the same time. That's 2 words. They could even do a third one there, possibly, depending on what the word is. But the word comprehension, that might have to get read with 1 fixation. So that wastes, the ability to download into their brain some more information at 1 fixation. That's the kind of thing that we're talking about. Short blocks of text, that's again more comprehension. Long blocks of text, low comprehension. These big chunks of text, they do nothing but discourage people. They come up to it, and seriously, no more than 4 lines in a block of text. 3 is even better. But if you go to 5, most of the time when the eye meets that, the brain's going to go, you know what? I don't really have time for this right now. Let's move on to something else. And that can be detrimental to you, especially if there was something very, very critical about, your abilities, and you make the text, you want to squeeze so much in there, right, that you make it 5 lines, and then they skip right over it and don't read it. And that's the fact, folks. These people are really busy, and they don't have time to go through a whole bunch of stuff. So, their whole mentality is, I want to, as much as possible, get through these resumes and find the candidates, that I might be interested in. So they're by no means looking for excuses to read more. For maximum impact with lasting impression, what do you want to do? You want to keep things simple. Don't make it elaborate. Don't go for any outlandish designs or layouts. And don't try to impress them with an incredible vocabulary. Keep it simple, and that's going to actually relate the information in such a way that it makes an impact. Okay, if I'm a teacher, I can relate some, if I have high school students, I might be competent enough to teach to college level students. I might be able to teach a graduate class. I might be able to give a lecture to my peers. If, however, I can't bring it down to a high school level, then I can't teach a high school student, because I'm going to be relating stuff to them that is not going to make a lasting impression. In other words, they won't actually learn. I could be telling them great information, and someday when they get to that level, fantastic. But when they're a high school student, they can't handle it. So you've got to be able to break it down to their level. Remember that the hiring manager's ultimate goal is to weed out resumes. That also goes for the recruiter or the HR personnel. They're not looking for an excuse to add one more resume to the interview list. They want as few as possible because remember, interviews, face-to-face interviews, cost money. Start out strong, because if you're strong right out of the gate, that makes a first impression, and they're going to assume that you're going to be strong throughout. And that is actually, that's a great way to take advantage of their assumptions. If you start out real strong and they're like, okay, you got my attention, even if they don't read the rest of the resume, they've probably read enough that they decide to go ahead and put you in the stack to keep. It's kind of like when you maybe you're going out to buy a new house, right? And you pull up on the drive and the house looks great. Okay, so first impression, you're pretty happy. If you pull up and the house looks kind of run down and shabby, you're not going to go, well, I think I'm going to go ahead and pull up anyways and go inside. Maybe the kitchen's nice. Right? You're not going to be interested because it was a turnoff from the initial get-go from far away. Your resume is the same thing. It's got to make a strong impression right up front. They're going to judge you and your resume based on that initial appearance. And by appearance, I'm talking about not even reading stuff that's on the resume. Just when they look at it, how is it laid out? Does it seem like all the text is jumbled together in these big, humongous, honking paragraphs that my mind doesn't even want to deal with right now? Or is it laid out in such a way that makes it real simple for me to, I can look at stuff and at a glance, I can take in whole thoughts just with one little fixation. That's where our ultimate goal is. Now, here's a checklist that I want you to go through as you get ready to sit down and write your resume. You want to make sure when you're all done that you have done all of this and make any necessary edits. Okay. First, strong, very strong in the top third. That gives you that curb appeal. Just like we were talking about with the house. In the top third of the page, you hit them real hard. You've got keywords in there. You've got, none of this, no career objectives. Those are so lame. They're nothing but, me. Do you think a hiring manager cares about your career objectives? I don't even know how that started, because no hiring manager cares about what you're interested in doing in your career. They're really not. They're interested in how you're going to solve their problems, their company's problems. Customize the resume to their needs. So as you read through, let's say you got the resume done, you're at number 2 here, customize to their needs. Look through there and see, have I dealt, when I did my research, and I wrote down things about the company, what they're dealing with, what they're looking to do, the direction they're going. Have I dealt with any of that in this resume? If not, you need to go back and make corrections. Avoid fancy stuff, weird fonts and all kinds of stuff that would just be distracting on the page. Is there anything out of date? If it's out of date, leave it out. I know. You spent all that time and you went to, hours and hours of some school back in 1965, and it was a great accomplishment for you, and I'm proud of you. However, today, it's probably not going to be relevant because fact is they probably don't even do things that way anymore. Whatever it is that you went to, it's probably so out of date, there's no point in doing it. Yeah, if you won the Nobel Peace Prize, go ahead, put that in there. But you need to incorporate some stuff that shows, that I am current. I'm still an excellent chemist, for example. Whatever you won the Nobel Peace Prize for. But unless you won that Nobel Peace Prize, if it's just other accomplishments that you've done that are way out of date, I'm talking like, more than 10 years, don't put it in there because it's not going to do you any good and it's just taking up space. Make impact statements first. So in other words, I wouldn't say started at the bottom working as a technician and developed sales relationships, moving up into sales within 2 years and sold $512,000 worth of equipment. Okay, that makes the impact statement last. And the thing is, if you put so much information in there, they might get to that paragraph, that block of text, start reading it, get totally bored and move on, and they might not even read the real impact. So what you would do with that is redo it, list the impact first. Sold over $500,000 worth of merchandise in my first year at sales. Okay, eliminate things that are really irrelevant and put things in there that are going to show them, this is what I am capable of actually doing. Does my resume use their terminology? When I did my research, when I did my phone call, am I using the specific kinds of words to describe the position and the industry that they like to use? You want to make sure that you're doing that. Bottom line is, you're not going to go to a foreign country and speak your own language and expect to get really good results. You're going to go there and you're probably going to try to, maybe you carry one of those little books around with you too, one of them little dictionaries, right? And if there's something that you got to say to somebody, you're going to look up the word in the dictionary, translate it, and say it in their language. That's the only way you can expect them to understand. Same thing here. Yeah, the jobs might be the same. The actual work that they would have you do is the same as what you've done in the past, but the terminology is what's going to relate that to them, that this is the same job. And then you want to review and edit the entire resume and have it proofread by somebody else. Believe it or not, there are hiring managers that instruct their assistants to go through the resumes and regardless of content, regardless of qualifications, eliminate any resumes with spelling or grammatical errors. All over the world, all kinds of businesses, and these hiring managers will simply toss your resume because you spelled something wrong. We're not perfect, right? We're all human beings, and in a very real sense, we make mistakes, but you do not want to make a mistake on your resume. Let's look at resume types, and this is going to be our last slide for this video. There are 3 basic types. We have the reverse chronological. This is probably the most popular, the one that you're most familiar with. It simply lists your history of jobs with the most present job being first, and then you go back from there. Then we have the functional resume. This focuses more on what you did, not so much when you did it. A lot of times, though, with this, it's used to cover up lapses of employment, like when you just decided to live on the beach in California for a year, or Baja, Mexico, I should say. With this, the functional type of resume, hiring managers kind of know that that is what people use it for because it's real good to cover up those kinds of things. So if the only thing I would suggest that you use that for is if this type of resume is if there's a particular job that normally does have a pretty high turnover rate, so it's not that big of a deal, that you weren't working or that you worked there for 4 months and then moved on to something else. Other than that, though, you would not want to use a functional resume. A combination resume starts out as a functional resume and then it ends up as a reverse chronological. And even that one, I would say, don't use it because a lot of hiring managers just don't like that format because they know, like, even if they really go through it, if you send them a functional resume or a combination, they'll assume that there's something wrong with something that you're trying to hide, And then if they can't find it, they'll just assume that they just can't find it, but that there is something there. So for the most part, you want to use reverse chronological. That's the way to go. If you have big gaps in your work history, that's going to throw up a red flag. It is, and that's why a lot of people don't like to use that style. But if that's the case, you just feature something in there that you did that was constructive during that time. Maybe you were a volunteer. Maybe you might have lost your job. You might have just decided to quit, and you had some spare time on your hands, and so you went and volunteered at some local community effort. Okay, doesn't really matter the motivation behind it, but just if you can show that you did do something constructive during that time, that'll really help. What about the number of pages for your resume? This is like a big controversial thing. As far as I'm concerned, the only question is 1 or 2 pages. Never, ever over 2, even if you are going for a senior position. Most people, if they see a resume over 2 pages, they assume that you are very amateur and do not know what you're doing. Most of the time, you're going to stick with 1, especially if you just got out of college, you don't have a whole lot of experience, you're just going to go with 1. If you do have a lot of experience and you're going for a senior position, then 2. 2 pages maximum. Okay, never over. Interactive. This is something that's fairly new, but with interactive, it's an online deal. And you could put links in your resume there online. You can put audio and video, which is pretty slick. What you want to be careful with, though, is this is supplemental information. It should not just be a duplicate of your hard copy resume that you sent in. So if you sent them in a resume and then you just have a PDF version online, that's kind of, it's a waste of time. If, however, there is something that you can showcase on that online version, maybe you need to relate to them your personality, and you can do that in a video, then absolutely yes. But ask yourself, am I just doing this because it's kind of neat to do, or am I really providing something that I couldn't provide in that hard copy? Another nice thing with the interactives is, if you did a project, let's say you did a web design project, real convenient and easy to put a little link there so they can click on it and go check it out. The length of your bullets and blocks. This is pretty critical with the layout, because this is what's going to make, people are going to make decisions on whether to read this stuff or not. And we know, sad but true, people are not going to read the entire resume, right? We want to kind of focus them in on specific areas, and hopefully they get the highlights. The way that they do that is by us keeping the bullets and blocks in simple bite-sized chunks. That's the goal here. Nothing big and long. Remember, no more than 4 lines in a block. No more than 4 or 5 bullet points in one block. If you go beyond that, in fact, I recommend whenever you have a block of text, like if you have a block of 4 lines, for example, your bullet points should be 4 or less. The reason is, naturally when people read something like that, they expect for the bullet points to be something much more concise. And if there's a number of bullet points that totally offset the block, then it kind of looks like it's just, it's lopsided. Also, don't do just one single bullet point. That looks kind of cheesy. Make sure you got at least 2. So 2, 3, or 4 bullet points is really going to be the maximum that you're going to use. And you can structure those, in such a way that it relates the information that you wanted to relate. And if there's something else that you want to say, figure out if you can do another block of text and then support that with some bullet points. That is the layout stuff, though, that I want to give you. And you need to keep this in the back of your mind as you're going through developing your resume, because if we apply these strategies, then we make it easier for them to digest and comprehend exactly what it is that we're saying. And that gives us a competitive edge in getting our resume selected for an interview.